All right, we're making great progress. It's now time to have a look at ID and class selectors. We'll be discussing limitations with the type selector, the ID selector, and the class selector. Let's dive in. So first up, let's discuss some limitations with type selectors. Sometimes we want to apply specific styles to a single element. For example, let's look at this homepage. You can see the paragraph text here is in white. And in this design, white paragraph text is only used on the hero section. Looking at a section of the page lower down, you can see over here that grey paragraph text is used everywhere else. So simply styling a paragraph grey wouldn't work. We need a method to style a specific element. And to do that, we use the ID selector. The ID selector selects an element based on a unique ID attribute and can only be used once. We've actually met the ID selector already. Back in the HTML section, we learnt about a method called anchor linking, where we put an ID selector on a specific element and would then reference that in a hyperlink, so that when you click the hyperlink, you are taken to that section of the page. Let's now look at an example using the ID attribute in CSS. Let's say we have an index.html page, and we have this body with this paragraph text. You can see here the ID attribute. It has the value red-text. In the app.css file, we would have styles like this, where the color of all paragraphs is grey, but the paragraph with the ID value red text is set to red. The ID selector has this hash symbol in front of the value of the ID attribute in the HTML. So all we do is add an ID attribute to the element we want to target in our HTML, and then reference that value in CSS with the hash symbol followed by the value. Let's play around with this in VS Code. I'm back inside the index.html file for the Quill project we've been working on. If you're joining me for the first time in this video, Quill is the major project we've been working on. If this is your first time seeing it, don't worry, you'll be able to follow along just fine. I'm going to scroll down to the hero section, and let's go target this paragraph over here. We'll add an ID attribute, and let's make it green, so I'm going to give it the value of green text. Over in app.css, I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom. I'll grab the hash symbol. I'll then reference the ID attribute value, which is green text. Grab our curly brackets, and let's give it the color of green. Let's check this out in the browser. So you can see now that this paragraph is green, whereas all the other paragraphs still remain the grey color. By using the ID attribute, we're only targeting this paragraph here in the hero section. Let's now continue our discussion with limitations of the type selector. Sometimes we want to apply specific styles to multiple elements. So the ID selector can't help us here, because that's used to target one selector and we can only use it once. For example, looking at this page here, you can see that there's grey text on the feature section. Scrolling down on the page, we can see here there's also grey text on the testimonial section. However, in other feature sections, we can see here that white text is used on the feature section. And on this section of the page, we have white text on the hero section. So in multiple places we have grey text, and in multiple places we have white text. So to help with this, we have the class selector. The class selector selects one or more elements based on a class attribute that can be used multiple times. Let's look at an example of this. Looking at the same index.html file we saw before, over here you can see I have the class attribute. I've given it the value blue-text, and I've used it twice. This is what makes the class attribute different to the ID attribute. It can be used multiple times. Having a look now at the app.css file, we select the class attribute with a full stop, or a period. And just like the ID attribute, we then provide the value that was used for the class attribute in our HTML, in this case blue-text. Let's have a play around with this in VS Code. I'm back in the index.html file, and I'm now going to select an element that I want to apply the style to in multiple places. Let's go do it on this H3 that we're using 3 times inside our features section. I'll add a class by typing class and hitting enter, and let's make this text orange, So we'll call it orange-text. I'm then going to copy the class and just paste it in this H3 and this H3. In app.css, to use the class selector, we type full stop or period and use the value of the class attribute, which we called orange-text. I'll grab our curly brackets, type color, and give it the value of orange. So let's check this out in the browser. So you can now see that our 3 H3s are all orange. We've targeted multiple elements and applied the same style using the class selector, whereas the ID selector only selected one element. So let's now discuss some selector guidance. Classes are often preferred over IDs because they offer greater flexibility and reusability. Let's have a look at an example. Let's say we had this index.html file, and we had this app.css file, targeting all paragraphs as grey, and then having a class called redText, which makes the text red. Initially in the project, we may just start with one. However, as the project grows, later on we can add another class of redText. So we can easily add styles as the project scales. So because classes can be applied once or multiple times, they offer a lot more flexibility. Let's now look at the next piece of guidance. It is common to use type selectors for global styles and class selectors for more specific visual styles. Taking a look at this page here, this heading would be styled using the type selector. It's a global style, meaning that all H1s throughout the application would be white, with this font size, etc. Whereas for more specific styles, we would use a class selector. For example, this gradient text here could be using the class gradient. So type selectors are useful for global styles, which are used throughout the application, whereas class selectors are useful for styling specific elements or components. So let's jump into Visual Code and check this out. So we've in fact already done this earlier. I created this class called orange-text, and I applied this to the heading 3s on the page. This orange text is essentially overriding the default text applied to all headings, which we can see up here. But we have our grouped headings with this grey color being applied. So this style sets the default base color of all our headings. And then we can create a class like this called orange text and apply it to specific text elements we want to style. In this case, we added it to the H3 elements. And like in the example we saw just before, we could also style just a portion of text. So let's make a class called popText. Let's give it a color of red. Let's give it a font weight of 900. And let's add some text decoration of red, solid, and underline. Let's apply this popText to the word simplicity over here. I'll head to index.html. To do this, I need to add a span. I'll cut the word simplicity, pop it inside the span, and give this the class popText. Let's refresh the browser. And you can see, once again, this class popText is overriding the default text styling applied to our paragraphs, which we can see over here. We're adding a much thicker font weight of 900 versus 400. The color is being overridden to red, and we're also adding an underline. Now this next piece of guidance is a little bit more tricky, but we will go through it step by step, so just stick with me. Classes for components are designed to be combined on a single HTML element for a more modular approach to styling. Alright, so what does this all mean? First of all, the word components. This is something we're going to be using a lot throughout this course. A component is a piece of reusable UI, or user interface. It's a piece of UI we continue to use throughout the application. So let's take a look at an example of a classic piece of UI. Buttons. Buttons are used throughout the application, on the home page, login page, and within the application itself. Buttons are an example of a component or a piece of reusable UI that is used throughout the application. Now, as you can see here, we actually have two different kinds of buttons. We have this green button, which would likely be a primary button, and this white button, which would likely be a secondary button. The colors are different, but the core structure of the button is the same. It has the same rounding. It has the same font size. There's a lot of structural properties here that are the same. So let's now look at the best approach to creating this component in CSS with class selectors. We'd first define a class like this, which sets the button structure. Now, don't worry at all about any of the properties here. The only ones we've covered so far are text decoration and font size. Border radius, padding, and display are properties we're going to look at in the next topic. Just know you need them to create the structure of the button. We would then add this button class to our anchor tag by using the HTML attribute class and giving it the value button btn. This would create the structure of our button. What we would then do is make a new class called button-primary. You can see it has this blue background color and white text. So the aim of this class is it sets a particular button style rule. We would then add this class in addition to the previous class to our anchor tag. So the styles are combined and our class attribute is button btn and button primary. This would then give us our blue button with white text. And again, the structure of the button is from the btn class, whereas the specific styling of the background color and white text is from our btn-primary class. So this all seems a bit confusing just to give us a button. So let's now look at why this method is so powerful. Let's say in our application, like our quill application, we have a purple button. What we would then do is define a second class, which I'm calling button-secondary. I'm giving it a purple background color and the font color of white. For a hyperlink I want to be a purple button, I would then use this button secondary class. So I'm still referencing the button class to get the structure, but now I'm using the button secondary class to apply the specific styling I want of purple and white. And this would give me a button that looks like this. This method of combining styles like this is incredibly common, and it gives us a modular approach to styling, where we define the structure in one class and then specific styling rules in other classes that we simply add on inside the class attribute. What we've just seen here is what we will be implementing in our quill project in the next video, so make sure to check it out to see this in action. This is in fact the approach many CSS frameworks like Bootstrap take. A lot of coding bootcamps will teach Bootstrap, but I specifically don't because I find it a bit of a cop-out, and I much prefer you to get a solid understanding of CSS. I'm going to be talking about CSS frameworks like Bootstrap towards the end of the CSS module, but I just wanted to show you that this is exactly how these frameworks do it. If I head over to Docs and scroll down to Components and go to Buttons, you can see that there's this base class, btn, and you can get all these different variants, which are simply added to the base class. For example, button primary, button secondary, etc. The reason I'm not teaching Bootstrap is because we in fact are going to be building our own mini Bootstrap. We're going to be writing our CSS using this modular approach. Don't worry about Bootstrap right now, I just wanted to show you that this method of combining classes like this is incredibly popular and is foundational to a lot of CSS frameworks. Long story short, I'm teaching you CSS properly and not distracting you with these frameworks, which are helpful, but only once you understand the foundations of CSS. So let's wrap up this video by finishing the summary card, basic selectors, and the cascade. In this video, we looked at ID and class selectors. Inside the HTML, we can add the ID attribute, like ID red text, and the class attribute, like blue text. In CSS, we select the ID selector, like this, where we use the hash symbol followed by the same ID text used in the HTML attribute. And this would apply the color red to the text copper mug. And we saw that the ID attribute can only be used once. For the class selector, it looks like this, where we use a full stop or period followed by the value that's used in the HTML attribute. In this case, on the text biodiesel tattooed and coloring book. We saw that the class selector can be used multiple times. And because of this, it's more commonly used, as it allows our project to scale when we want to apply the same style across different HTML elements in the project. Don't forget, you can download all the summary cards and presentation slides from the Bootcamp in the link in the description below. Thanks for watching. I'm working super hard to build up this channel and release new videos each week. It would mean a lot if you could subscribe by clicking here. And click here to move on to the next video in the playlist.